communist usually is a former socialist who changed his or her mind about something. And the best way to understand it is, again, a little history, as it often is. World War I was a crucial moment for all socialists. Would they fight or not? Debs and Lenin said, we will not fight. And they went to jail or they were exiled because of it. Many socialists said we have to be loyal in our country. So, for example, the majority of German, because socialism was stronger in Germany at the beginning of World War I than anywhere else in the world. I mean, Marx was German, reason for that. The Socialist Party split. It had elected many deputies to the parliament, and under parliamentary rules in Germany, as in many countries, the money for fighting World War I had to be voted by the parliament. And if they didn't get a majority of the votes, they couldn't fight a war. The Kaiser at that time, the leader of Germany, Kaiser Wilhelm, he could declare a war, which he did. He couldn't fight it unless the bourgeoisie voted through its representatives to give him the money authority, the taxes and the printing authority to go ahead and do it, which was typical in all the countries. So the socialists, who were huge, the second largest party in Germany at the time of World War I was the Socialist Party. That's how strong they were. They had to decide what are their deputies going to do. If they had voted as a bloc against it, either the war wouldn't have happened or it would have happened very differently. What are you going to do, arrest them all? It's your second biggest party, and you have real trouble in your country. So the tremendous pressure put on them, and they split. A majority of them went with the government and voted what were called war credits, voted for. A minority voted against. They were arrested. And the most famous among those arrested, a Socialist Party delegate to the German government, was a woman named Rosa Luxemburg. The war is now over, but the memories are bitter. Germany has lost the war, so everybody who voted for it is in the doghouse politically. The Kaiser is gone. Germany has lost, devastated country, and it has reparations to pay to Britain, France, for the war. That was a new development. Make the loser pay. Who were the heroes? The few socialists who refused. They now, in retrospect, looked like the wise ones. We should have followed them and wouldn't be in this terrible position. But they were very bitter against each other, these two. Because it was life and death for many of them and their families and everything else. Plus, a radical thing had changed the world. In one country, Russia, in the middle of World War I, 1917, remember the war goes from 1914 to 1918. In the middle of 1917, a revolution happens inside one of the warring countries, Russia, in which socialists take over and become the new government. You cannot understand modern history if you do not understand the importance of this. What it did was it made every socialist in the world say, oh my God, we've never done it. We've been an opposition party, we've been radicals, but we haven't won anywhere. Closest thing was something called the Paris Commune. For a few weeks in 1871, the working class took over the city of Paris and ran it, threw out the government and ran it themselves, called the Paris Commune. Marx was still alive and was involved from London with it. Wrote one of the greatest things he ever wrote about it. What mistakes they made. That was what was used by Lenin later to try to strategize the Russian Revolution, not to make the mistakes that they had made. Every socialist everywhere, no matter what she thought, realized they figured it out. These three famous men, Lenin, Trotsky, Stalin, the three. There were other leaders, but they were the three who came to be known, partly because of stuff that happened later. These Russians figured out how to take the next step of capturing a government. So the socialists around the world said, we have to support them. The revolution happens late in 1917, basically October, November. By 1918, 4 Western countries decide to invade Russia to crush this new communist, socialist, whatever government. Those 4 countries were Britain, France, United States, and Japan. They all sent troops to work with the Russians inside the country who were against the revolution. Rural people, right-wing people, religious people, that. Lots of them, too. There was a civil war going on inside the Russian Revolution. After the revolution, and it pitted the Red Army against the White Army. That's what they were called. Trotsky was in charge of the Red Army, and they were fighting to see whether the revolution would survive. And the White Army got the assistance of troops from Britain, France, United States, and Japan. By the way, footnote, 10,000 troops Americans, were landed in Russia to fight against the new socialist government. Did Russians ever land in the United States to fight anybody? Never. Who, therefore, has the right to be afraid of whom? The Red Army won, the White Army was defeated, those foreign armies were driven out. The last Japanese soldier left in 1922. The world of socialism split all around the world. Those who believed you had to support whatever the Russians did, whatever the Soviets did, they were the ones who figured it out. They knew how to capture power. We got to go with them. And their great leader, at least the first 5 years, because that's as long as he lived. From 17, he died in 22. Lenin, the great leader, was also a theoretician, a scholar. I don't know if you ever studied any of his work. The best book, I think, to this day, written on Russian economic history, written by Lenin. 600 pages analyzing how Russia came to be the successful, fantastic scholarship in detail. And anyway, so the world split, and the socialists who said Russia is the way, is the future, said we have to change our name, and they called themselves communists. The other ones who didn't like Russia or weren't so sure called themselves socialists. And they split, and for example, in a place like France, that's the date when the Communist Party was founded, 1920-21, and there have been Communist Party versus Socialist Party with lots of bitterness ever since. And you have that in many, many other countries, including the United States. That's when the Communist Party is formed here. By whom? By ex-socialists. In Russia, again, for long reasons, I have a book, if you're ever interested, which goes through the rise and fall of the economic system of the Soviet Union. The book is called Theory and History, Capitalism and Communism in the USSR. Russia decided that traditional socialism was inadequate under the new circumstances. It wouldn't be adequate, they said, for the government to tax and regulate. This was the argument. You cannot leave the ownership and operation of the enterprise in private hands, because the private owner has a different network of incentives from what the government would have. And they, the private owners, will find ways to evade, avoid, get around, soften everything the government tries. If the government taxes them, they'll figure out how to escape it. The government regulates them, they'll figure out how to escape. By the way, the United States is an illustration that they had something to say. Anyway, their solution was the government should take over the ownership and operation. Many socialists had never said that. Many socialists to this day don't want that, don't believe in it. The Russian model, what became the Soviet model of socialism, had the government owning and operating. Therefore, the government said we can be now much more confident that the tax we impose, the regulation we impose, will be followed because these are our people. We're going to name who's on the board of directors. They're going to be state officials, not private individuals. There is no stock market in Soviet Russia. Nobody can buy a share of a company. We don't have any of that. At first, it was just industry, not agriculture. Eventually, they created what were called state farms that were state enterprises with farmers. What became the key difference between communists and socialists? Communists wanted state ownership and operation. Socialists did not. And to this day, in Western Europe, socialists do not demand what would be called the nationalization or the socialization of enterprises. They don't. At most, what they do is particular ones. These, they say, are important enough that the government should run them. So, for example, you may remember when you went to Paris years ago that everybody there smokes very strong cigarettes with names like Gitan or Gauloise, right? But at that time, those were government businesses because tobacco had to be taxed and tobacco had a certain sinfulness attached to it, like alcohol, that the government insisted we're going to produce. Okay, so the French government produced all those cigarettes. To this day in France, the railways are all nationalized. So the SNCF, which is the Railroad of France, is a government operation. So it used to be that oil and gas and telephone and airline. Air France, that was a government operation. Now, because of the power of the United States in the second half of the 20th century, a number of those socialist ownerships have been privatized, have been sold back into the private sector. So Air France is once again a private company. And I think the EDF, that's called Électricité de France, is now once again private. That's the part of socialism in France that was undone. But there were other parts of socialism that were not. For example, just to give you an idea, if you have a baby in France, the government assigns you a social worker. You don't have to accept them if you don't want them, but you get one automatically. And the cost is nothing. And that person is there to help you, I think, the first 6 months. And you can ask them to do anything. Change the baby, bathe the baby, go out shopping. The assumption is you need help as a new parent, to get used to all of that. So you get this. National health, the higher education. Bread is subsidized in France. The socialists pushed all that stuff through. Here's one that Americans always look at me and they get that sad look in their face, like the puppy who hasn't gotten his bone to chew. I say to them, in France, it's the law. The minute you graduate from high school or college, you take your first job. Your employer has to give you 5 weeks paid vacation every year. That you don't have to bargain for it, go on strike for it, ask for it. None of it. It's automatic because it's part of a decent life that you have time off without having to worry about the money. Americans look at me as if I have described to them some magical place way up in the sky in heaven that some nasty person invented just to make them feel bad that they don't have anything like it. I tell them most Americans don't get 5 weeks paid vacation after 20 years on the job. I mean, it's just socialists did that. And so popular is it that no conservative government, and there have been many, would dare touch it because they'd be voted out of office in 10, maybe 12 minutes. What has happened in the world economy is not the passage from capitalism to socialism. It's from one kind of capitalism to another, from American capitalism to Chinese. In China, you have employers and employees, both private and public, because China is an interesting hybrid. It takes half of China is like the United States and Britain, private companies, private employers, all that. The other half is government-owned. So half Soviet, half American. It's figured out a hybrid which has the following interesting quality. Grows a hell of a lot faster than either of the others, which isn't so surprising. It's why you make hybrids. Every farmer in America will tell you that. So China is a new kind of capitalism. It mingles socialism, lots of government. It mingles the old socialism, government regulating private enterprise. That's half of China. And it mingles Soviet socialism. The other half of the Chinese economy, government-owned operated enterprises. Wow. It's the latest kind of socialism. And it calls itself that. And it has a communist party that's in charge of managing the socialism that they have. But the irony is, it still leaves the open question, which comes from Marx, that the issue is beyond all of that. Not that that isn't important. Look, it's created China. It's created a whole new world economy. I don't want to minimize that at all. But it still leaves open that the next step in human evolution will be, whether it happens first in the U.S. with a declining capitalism, or first in China with a rising capitalism, who will be the first and why to make the break and to try to organize a democratized economic system. And the kernels of it, the seeds of it, the beginning, are the existence of worker co-ops that are all over the world, including in the United States, and have been here for a long time. It's not a question of discovering something new. It's a question of readapting an older form under new circumstances to play a new role in society. Whatever we think of democracy, the reason our political democracy, to the extent we have one, doesn't work as well as it could or should, is because we try to marry it with an economic system that is not democratic. When you cross the threshold into your factory, your office, your store, you give up democracy. You are agreeing by taking the job to be told what to do, how to do, where to do it, when to do it, and that somebody else will tell you, we don't need you anymore, go home. It's Friday, have a nice weekend, don't come back on Monday. It's incredible that we do that. That's not democracy. We have no say in that. Somebody else decides whether what we do is valuable or not, adequate or not. It's amazing. We accept this. There will come a time when we will not. Just like people accepted there has to be a king. I make a joke in my classes. We didn't get rid of kings. We allowed them to change their name and come back with a disguise. We call them CEOs. That's what they are, little kings in their little kingdoms, where they sit in the prime office with lots of furnishings and lots of servants and tell everybody else what to do. We got rid of the king. We don't regret it. Let's get rid of the king in the enterprise. We won't regret it either. It will not only make the enterprise into a democratic community, but it'll make the effort to do it in where we live much realer than it is now. We have to learn our own history. We, the Americans, have to do with China what the British had to do with the American colony that broke away. Work something out. You can do here, we'll do over there. The planet can handle both of us if we work together, and we will destroy each other, which serves nobody if we don't. I think that will be the debate, and I want to think that the wiser heads will prevail, and another person who will then come to be known as George Washington will say, this is the way we ought to go, and people will say, George, go out there, talk with Xi Jinping or whoever comes later, and work this out. And they will work it out.